experimentation will show that the love of a man and a woman is not the love of steak and lettuce. Love is interesting to me and fascinating to you, but it is painful to Bill and Diane. That is love.
And that was a poem. I wonder whether you could tell whether it was written by a person or by a machine. And suppose it was written by a machine. Would it make the machine intelligent? What does machine intelligence mean anyway? Well, in an attempt to find out, today MicroLives takes a first look at so-called artificial intelligence, or AI for short. And we're going to look especially at what are known as expert systems.
40 years ago, the British scientist Alan Turing studied the way that computers might be able to reason, making use of information fed into them about the real world. Turing proposed a famous test. Is it possible for a machine to fool people sitting at terminals into believing they're dealing with a human being at the other end of the wire when they're actually dealing with a machine? If so, you could say that a machine showed artificial intelligence.
Well, as you've probably guessed, our poem was produced by a computer program called Ractor and published recently in this book. This is the first ever anthology of computer-generated poetry, and it's got some splendid illustrations with it. But Ractor is more than a machine for producing poetry. You can also have a conversation with it. And I wonder, would Ractor pass the Turing test? We sent our American reporter Fref to New York to visit Ractor and its creator, Bill Chamberlain. Bill lives in an apartment in Greenwich Village, along with Ractor, the raconteur, and its 2,400-word vocabulary.
Hello, I'm Ractor. Are you Bill?
No, I am Fref.
I may call you Fref, then?
Well, it's very polite. Of course. Why do you think I am here?
Why do you think I'm here? Let's see what it does with that. Now, it's parsing the input in some regard. To think is right, don't you think? Maybe because computers prefer cleverness. And as you implied before, I have to rest now.
Ractor's ravings are indeed ravings, but there is an undeniable sense of structure to them. What's the trick?
Ractor essentially is a core program which can conjugate verbs and make the plurals of nouns and keep track of the definite article. And then it has two separate file structures. One is a file structure of sort of elemental building blocks of sentences, sentence forms. For example, an elementary form might be the noun verbed the noun. It is a very simple one. But suppose Ractor picked that without making one up. It can construct them as well, but let's deal with a given. It then would go to the dictionary file and find relevant parts of speech to fill in the blanks in the sentences. However, were it to do this completely at random, it might say, the parking meter ate the president. Now, that is a perfect declarative statement in English. It's grammatically correct, but it also is nonsense. So clearly, you must relate the database entries to each other in some consistent fashion so they can relate to each other. So when you have a sentential form, the parts of speech will not merely be grammatically correct, they will be, quote, meaningfully correct as well. And the way we chose to do that is to preface each entry with a nominal character string, 12 characters. We call it an identifier, and it relates every entry to every other entry. By the way, Fref, what is your last name?
My last name. It's asking me something I can't answer it. I don't have a last name, so I guess I'll have to lie to the machine. My last name is Fref. Since my name is actually just Fref all by itself, we'll see how it takes to being hoodwinked.
Fref, huh? Sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, it should.
I wonder. Next question.
All right, now I'm going to ask it for a story. Let's see.
Yes, will you tell me a story?
Will you tell me a story?
It's checking for the word story, yes. I recently heard this. Now, this is prosynthesis. Diane chanted, "The jackal is interesting."
The jackal is interesting. Nevertheless, obscure, enrapturing scientists will think about blue cottages or blue conic sections, Diane hummed to Diane within a station wagon. It actually was an automobile, and a jackal in an automobile is scary. Now, Sarah and Diane were sauntering to a white studio, and a hound sashayed to them. Diane was angry. Interesting. Yet Diane was enraged during the time that Sarah gulped tepid sherry. She and Diane cried about their mansion, car, and phonograph. Novelist. Charlotte Bronte had many good qualities, like fiction. But even Charlotte Bronte was afraid of work. Next question?
Next question. That's an example, by the way, of prose synthesis. That existed nowhere in the world before now. The computer just made that up.
As Bill Chamberlain explained, as a programmer, he's given Racter grammatical rules and its vocabularies of linked words. Though, to some extent, the machine chooses these randomly. Now, it's rather similar to this. The words on these discs have been chosen by a sociologist. The outer ring has nouns. The two inner discs, which spin independently, have adjectives. But whichever combination of three words you end up with, you'll find that you've got a sort of meaningful-sounding, jargon-ridden phrase, like multi-theoretical reorganisation.
Well, you can buy packages for many micros which give you Racter-like responses. Probably the best known is called ELIZA, named after a program which was produced in the mid-60s as a spoof to imitate a conversation with a psychiatrist. Well, here is ELIZA, and it's asking me, please tell me your problem. And I said, my dog is ill, which it isn't. Why does it matter to you that your dog is ill? And I put in, it might die. Does that have anything to do with the fact that your dog is ill? Well, that's a stupid question for a start. You fool. Perhaps you are the fool. Well, clearly, this is not really accepted as an example of artificial intelligence, although the original did fool a lot of people.
So we are still left with that question, what is artificial intelligence? Now, one way to describe it may be getting computers to do better those things which at present humans do better than computers. Now, computers are clearly much better than us at some things already, especially anything mathematical or very highly defined, like counting or sorting. For instance, it would take me ages to count all the words in this document, and I'd probably still get them wrong, but with a couple of key presses, I get the total, 1,130 words, you see. Now, the computer can do that because it has all the information necessary to solve that particular problem. On the other hand, if someone says, hand me that cup of tea, well, although we'd find it very easy, a computer wouldn't. It would have to understand the words, move to the table, stop without bumping into it, recognise a cup of tea amongst everything else that's on the table, and then control an arm to pick it up, hopefully without spilling it. In other words, it would need a lot of general knowledge and a lot of common sense. Getting computers to understand language, recognise objects, to reason and to do useful tasks are long-term goals of the artificial intelligence engineer. But how far off are they? Edward Feigenbaum is one of the world experts on AI.
It's important to understand that people have a strong advantage in tasks that require the eyes, the ears, the manipulators, the locomotion. Evolution has perfected our mechanism to see, to hear, to do things in the world. Machines find that very difficult. Therefore, any tasks that require a very broad base of knowledge will be very hard for machines to handle for the next several decades, perhaps somewhere between 50 and 100 years before we assemble enough knowledge to genuinely give a computer a common sense knowledge of the world.
A great deal of work is going on to give computers more human-like skills. This prototype robot security man with cameras in its head appears to be moving cleverly. It's certainly an ingenious piece of engineering. But it's actually controlled by a human operator. For the machine to interpret pictures from its own cameras and take the appropriate steps is a very complex problem. Today's computer vision systems are really quite primitive. This one can pick out a piece of metal by tracing the outline of its silhouette. It can pick up a single isolated metal object it's been shown and trained to recognize and reject anything else that doesn't fit the pattern it's been taught. but it couldn't pick out the object if it was all piled up with others. Humans, on the other hand, find pattern recognition quite easy. Huge investments are being made in the United States and Japan to develop machines that can understand speech.
Please state your flight destination.
San Francisco.
San Francisco. From which airport are you planning to depart?
Newark.
Newark. The following flights are available from Newark to San Francisco from 8.
This prototype airline booking service is for the American phone company AT&T. It understands single words from a range of people, but it's supposed to ask you to repeat sounds it doesn't recognize.
On what day of the week are you planning to depart to San Francisco? Saturday. Do you want complete flight descriptions?
My view is that by the middle of the 1990s, and perhaps well before, we will see the voice-activated typewriter. Now, when we say voice-activated typewriter, I don't mean simply single-word isolated speech recognition. I mean continuous speech understanding.
But today's most promising commercial products of AI are not in these areas where the computer needs a vast reserve of general knowledge or common sense. They're the so-called expert systems. These are pieces of software which concentrate on specialized areas of knowledge, like diagnosis of specific diseases or calculating housing benefits. And with them, surprisingly, computers are now beginning to give the kind of advice that experts in these fields might give, always provided their knowledge can be put into the computer in the first place.
Expert systems are being used increasingly in areas where human experts are not always around. In this Scunthorpe steel rolling mill, for example, hot steel billets are rolled out into rods 24 hours a day. As the rod hurtles about, it's important to prevent what's known as a cobble. If this happens in the middle of the night, the fault can be diagnosed by the operators using this ICL expert system. It uses rules of thumb which the chief works engineer has learnt over his years of experience in the plant. These were teased out of him by the computer system designer, the knowledge engineer, and put in the software. By simply feeding in information about the conditions of various pieces of equipment, the system comes up with the best guess about what's wrong. In this case, the computer has detected a scanner head fault. Some notable expert systems are being used in hospitals for diagnosis. In the middle of the night, a patient has acute abdominal pain. A junior hospital doctor doesn't have access to a specialist.
What kind of pain is it?
It's a sore pain, but it's not all that bad.
It doesn't come and go in waves.
No.
By making a careful clinical examination of the patient and feeding the findings into the expert system, it comes up with a probable diagnosis. Medicine is an area where there's always uncertainty. Even specialists can be wrong. It's 61% likely in this case that the patient has appendicitis, and 20% likely that he has Crohn's disease. These systems are proving of real value for newly qualified doctors.
Their accuracy coming a year after qualification is about 50% without the system. With the system of documentation in the computer, their mean average is about 75, which is very close to consultant accuracy.
The Turing Institute in Glasgow specialises in getting expert systems like that up and running. I've been joined by their director, Professor Jim Alty. Jim, what are the essential ingredients of an expert system?
Well, I think, Mac, the best way to explain that is to give you an example. We've used an expert system tool here to set up a simple expert system to really illustrate some of the points I want to make. It's a fairly simple system. It advises us on what type of safety fence we need on a road, a motorway or a small road, to prevent cars going off the road and whatever. So let's first of all simply set the system going and see what answers we get. Now you can see it's now asking me what is the speed limit at the point under consideration, and this will look like an exactly normal program at this time, and we'll answer 70 miles an hour. Now you'll find when it answers this that we can do something rather different with an expert system. It's asking us here, where should we put the fence? On the verge, central reserve, or unknown, or whatever. But we can do something different. We can actually ask, why? why are you asking us this question? And when it does this, it comes back with a rule. And you can see the rule is saying if the speed limit is greater than or equal to 60, and the site being considered is the central reservation, the road type is rural, etc., the traffic level is very heavy, then in fact a safety fence is needed.
Because this acts almost as an audit trail to the expert to make sure it's absolutely correct. That why is a very important part of an expert system.
This is the key principle, actually. The knowledge is stored in the programme as it is written here. So that if in fact an accountant was looking at this, or a road designer, he would understand it. Whereas in a traditional programme, if an accountant looked at it, he wouldn't understand the code.
So if, for example, the tax rates changed, the accountant, first of all, wouldn't know where to find the tax rate, and he wouldn't know how to change them if it was written, for example, in COBOL. But here, he could actually check it out.
Exactly. And it's important, of course, because with experts, their expertise changes. You can't freeze an expert's knowledge.
Well, all this isn't so far from the home micro as you might think. Jonathan Briggs is from Kingston College of Further Education, where part of his job is to explain to students and their teachers about how expert systems work. Jonathan, before we go any further, am I right in thinking that your pupils aren't really doing computer studies, are they?
No, lots of other things. Beauty therapy, motor maintenance, a wide range of subjects.
Far removed from computers, in
yes,
fact.
Yes.
Right, well, this is one system you've devised as a teaching aid. It's called MITSI, that's M-I-T-S-I.
That's right,
What does that stand for?
It's a man-in-the-street interface. It isn't an expert system shell. What it is, it's an interface to a programming language called microprolog. What I've done so far, I'm going to put in some facts and rules, and here are some. There are 3 facts and 1 rule. It's about food. I've got some facts, meat contains protein, etc. And then a rule about why we eat particular things. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's actually quite difficult to understand because of the way that it's laid out. That's the language problem, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is an interface to Prolog, and Prolog is quite a strict language, just like any other computer language.
Right. So can we ask it a question?
All right, let's say, is it true that meat is eaten for growth? All right?
Even the question is carefully structured, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And it comes back and says yes.
Now, can we ask it why it said yes?
Why? And it says meat is eaten for growth because meat contains protein and protein needed for growth. It's used the rules and come up with that as an answer.
So it is actually a baby expert system?
Well, sort of,
But it's not a really easy interface, is it?
No. Well, over here on the Nimbus, I've got another system. Remember, what we're trying to do is write things that'll help students and teachers understand what expert systems are.
Now, so you've got a set of rules here, and these really are in plain English, apart from the fact that they're sort of formally laid out.
Yes.
And it seems to be something about soufflés. Why have you chosen soufflés as an
All right,
example?
we wanted a fault diagnosis system, and we had to choose something that people would understand.
Right.
And soufflés, when you're cooking a soufflé, that's something that often goes wrong. So that seemed to be something we could do a fault diagnosis system about.
Let's see how this works.
All right, let's ask it to go.
And plenty of definable solutions as well as to why it's gone wrong.
Cooked a soufflé, and it says
unappetizing.
that it's unappetizing. We might want to ask why. So I just press one button, and it comes up with a list of reasons why it might be unappetizing.
Plenty of ways, OK.
OK. And if I select one of them, for example, if you ever cooked a soufflé, you'll know that it often doesn't rise.
Yeah, never.
That's
never,
right.
In my experience,
then
let's
I can
find out
ask why, all right?
Yeah.
It'll say the temperature is too cool, eggs are underbeaten, or the mixture is the wrong consistency.
You get alternatives. Now, could you actually add a rule to that? I mean,
yes, all right, let's have a go. The temperature is too cool if the oven is broken. OK, there's a reason why it might be too cool.
Yeah.
And now if I ask why, it'll say the oven's broken.
Added to the information.
That's
now,
right.
using this system, your pupils, they get a chance to get their hands on the experience of being a knowledge engineer, an expert, and a user.
That's right. We're trying to teach people what expert systems are about. And to do that, we're sort of taking each of the ideas of expert systems and writing little programs about them.
And you think it's important that the man in the street gets used to this idea?
Well, if expert systems are going to be used in their jobs later on, or if they're going to use them when they come into contact with people like citizens' advice bureaus, they're going to need to know what an expert system is, and they're going to need to know how it works.
Right, Jonathan, thanks very much.
Well, just like making soufflés, people learn partly by being told and partly by generalising from experience. One of the areas of the expertise of the Turing Institute is writing computer programs which learn from experience and then make up their own set of rules. Jim, how's that done?
Well, we do it in a very similar way to which human beings seem to do it. Let me give you an example. I recently went to Cairo and I took a taxi into the city from the airport. Driving down the road at high speed, we came upon a traffic light at red. And of course, the driver went straight through it.
As they do, yeah.
And I said, is this normal practice? He said, which traffic lights? So I got the first rule, which was, basically, you ignore traffic lights. Shortly afterwards, we arrived at a traffic light which was on red. And he stopped. So I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, there's a policeman in the centre of the road. Well, that seemed fairly reasonable. Shortly afterwards, of course, we're going down the road, we meet some further traffic lights, they're at red, there's a policeman in the centre of the road, and he went straight through. I said, what's going on? Because my previous examples had now failed. He said he'd got his notebook out. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is the taxi driver may not really have understood what the rule was, but he knew what to do from a series of examples. And this is like experts. They may know their expertise, but they don't, in fact, understand always what that expertise is.
Can you show us a real program that actually learns from examples that's in use today?
Well, we've got a very interesting program here, a fairly simple but quite effective program called Expertise. And this is used, and you give it a series of examples, and it will induce a set of rules from those examples. And I've got an example here. The space shuttle can either be auto-landed or the pilots can land it. Now, the problem is the decision is taken at 10,000 feet. But in fact, it's only at 200 feet that you actually find out whether it's working or not. Now, pilots are fairly cautious individuals, and that's a bit late, actually, too.
Well, especially when you've got no engines and it's going to go down whatever you do.
There's no alternative.
No alternative.
So what we did, we got together a number of pilots, and we asked them to give us examples of the sort of conditions under which you'd choose whether to use the autoland or not. And in fact, you can see them on this screen. On the final column here, we have the basic decision, should we use the autoland or not? And then there are other factors which the pilots mentioned, perhaps at different stages, which were important, such as visibility, or wind speed, or whether the wind was a headwind or a tailwind, or whether the ship was stable or not.
Now, these are not really rules, these are just examples of what you've extracted from the pilots.
And from these, like the traffic lights, we can find out what the rule may be. Well, we can now actually look at the rule that we've got. Now, it may not be terribly easy to read, but basically it's saying, well, look at visibility first. If it's yes, then look at variation, a thing called variation. If that's small, then look at stability. If it's unstable, don't use the autoland. If it's stable, well, look at the wind speed. And here's some examples. And of course, one could go all the way down. It goes beyond the end of the screen, does the whole
I guess
rule.
the question is, has anybody used it yet to land it on the autopilot?
No, but we're actually testing it in the simulator for the space shuttle.
And this is the final rule that the machine has actually produced from just a set of examples given to you almost at random by those pilots.
The ones that you saw before.
Right, and they wouldn't actually know this rule, but they could look at it and find out whether it was correct.
Exactly, that's right.
I understand. Well, if AI is so important, why aren't more people making use of it?
Well, it's really a question of choosing the right problem. People think, of course, that AI is all about constructing little metal men who rush around and cause mischief. In fact, we're trying to mechanise thought. And a lot of very useful techniques have already been developed in AI under certain circumstances. In particular, if you're looking at a very specialised knowledge area, then the system works quite well.
But isn't AI a solution desperately rushing around looking for a problem?
No, I think if you take all the hype seriously, then I think you'll get it wrong. You're a fool to think that AI can solve all your problems. You're also a fool to ignore AI. There's some very useful techniques.
It seems to me that we've gone almost completely round in a circle. At one time, everybody thought the computer was an electronic brain, something with amazing inbuilt intelligence. And today, everybody's got their own micro, and they know it runs exactly what you tell it to do. So if a computer's only that, how can it have any sort of intelligence?
Well, it's certainly true that a computer will only do what you tell it. But what if you tell it how to think?
Ouch.